integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of Tlingit people. Gunishish.
Thank you, Ms. Adkisson. Madam Clerk, will you call roll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms. Hughes Scandies. You're still muted. There
Here,
you go.
sorry, my mouse froze.
Thank you. Ms. Atkinson.
Here.
You. Ms. Wall.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Mr. Bryson.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Hill.
Here.
And Mayor Weldon.
Here.
And to note, we do not have Waulaki Dock and Assemblymember Smith with us. A quorum is present.
Thank you. So we will just go right into agenda topics because we don't have much time, I know. Flood mitigation update. Madam City Manager, I'm assuming that's to you.
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. If we could pull over National Weather Service to give us an update on the current status of Suicide Basin, that would be helpful. And then I have a PowerPoint presentation to share with you that basically walks you through the memo that was in your packet.
I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. Remember, Assembly member people, we haven't done Zoom for a while. Raise your virtual hand so I can find you because I can't see all of you. Thanks.
And
Why do you have questions? Sorry.
Ms. Kester, just to check, you were looking for Aaron Jacobs. I don't see that he's with us yet.
There's also a Nicole Farron may be online. She's also with National Weather Service.
See if I can find that name in our list here. Thank you.
I think I already see her here as a panelist.
Oh, here it is. Yes, thank you. I'm looking at the wrong list.
Yes, I was joining to listen in. I can check in. I know Aaron was working on joining. If you have a little more time.
That sounds great. Madam Mayor, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and start with my presentation and then the National Weather Service can update after that. Right, so hopefully you see my screen. I see I see my screen, but it's not the one where my camera is. So do you see the flood fighting requested action today?
We do.
Yes.
Okay. And you're gonna see the better side of me, one side of me because of my my screen. No, we got it. We're good. Thank you. Okay, so the decisions that I have before you today are really three decisions, and I just want to start and end on that note. And the first decision is to direct us to request sandbags from U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and develop a plan for distribution. This would be for private homeowners to be able to protect their property. The Army Corps has, since drafting of this memo, has identified resources to send Army Corps experts to Juneau to have a public meeting to help homeowners with kind of all those questions surrounding their own homes. And so we will be scheduling that and publicizing that just as soon as we're able to coordinate that. The Army Corps will be giving us 60,000 sandbags, which is a lot of sandbags, and so we need to just manage that distribution program. But probably a more important decision today is the approval of an emergency ordinance, which is a contract with the Army Corps of Engineers for HESCO barriers. Those HESCO barriers are what we would be lining the river with to protect life and property in the event of the next Yoka Loop. And so the ordinance that we're asking you to approve today, it's a donation from Army Corps of Engineers or your federal taxpayer dollars at work, and the barriers would be of no charge, but we would be in charge of installing them. So the third request that I have for the body today is to introduce a emergency appropriation at the next regular assembly meeting for $2 million to begin that process. So just to walk through the memo a little bit. The Assembly has taken a lot of action. This will be the 5th meeting about mitigation. You've appropriated funds for mapping and planning, and we have those contracts out to do kind of the most quick and dirty mapping and hydrological updates to be able to have more information to make decisions, because I appreciate that we can make better decisions with more information. And in a sense, we're asking you to make an initial decision now with partial information and then come back to you with a phase 2, more consequential decisions with more information. So I appreciate your support there. You've appropriated match for a long-term fix. You've appropriated funds to repair CBJ infrastructure. We've also engaged a lot with federal partners and local partners. We've engaged with Forest Service. Can't overstate how grateful we are for the Army Corps of Engineers engagement, both in long-term solutions, short-term solutions, flood fighting. They've really leaned in. We've been able to engage, of course, with National Weather Service, NRCS, and just we have a standing meeting now with the federal family. So a lot of coordination going on. And I want to thank everyone for that. But where are we? We are searching for solutions. So I want to kind of categorize the solutions into short-term solutions and long-term solutions. The short-term solutions are the sandbags for individual property owners and the temporary levels of HESCO barriers along the length of the river. What's important is that these HESCO barriers and this flood fighting plan has been developed with the help of the Army Corps of Engineers. So even though, we've had to do things quickly, we do have the experts in the room, and that's been really important. Now, we haven't been able to focus a lot on our long-term solution because the priority is flood fighting, but that is definitely still underway. The Assembly did appropriate $3 million for a general investigation study. That's a local match that's required to initiate that project. And what we will turn to next is advocating for federal funding to be able to actually start that project. So that will kind of be once we have the ball rolling with flood fighting and protecting the community next year, that will be where we turn our attention. So I just want to assure people that the long-term solution is still out there. It's just there's no way we can identify a long-term solution in time to, in the next few years, likely. So what does temporary flood fighting look like? These are the HESCO barriers that the Army Corps has set aside for us in action. They're 4 feet tall. They have a 3-foot footprint. And why HESCO barriers? They're readily available. The Army Corps is recommending them. They are easier to install and less than the less invasive barriers. So you've probably seen, we've gotten lots of great recommendations of, these aqua fences and things that like come up and come down really easily. But the reality is you need a nice flat level paved surface for those. And that along Mendenhall River is not that. You also can pyramid the HESCO barriers so that if you need higher heights, they're 4 feet high. In some areas, we will likely need more than 4 feet of protection. We don't know exactly where those areas are, but the cost, of course, of installing those and more significant, the footprint of installing those will grow if we have to build them taller. And I just want to highlight that there is a maintenance requirement for these barriers. They have a lifespan of 5 years, and we would be, repairing and replacing and tending to those barriers, again, while we work on a long-term solution. So what does the phase 1 look like, which is what I'm asking for you today, is to introduce an emergency appropriation for phase 1. And that looks like starting with Killowitch. Killowitch is an area where the river jumped the bank. Regardless, it's probably a good idea to be able to install barriers on Killowitch. It's also going to be a little bit easier to start with Killowitch because those properties have more frontage. Other areas that we would prioritize are along Meander Way, Marion Drive, in order to, again, this was another area where the bank, where the river jumped the bank. And that's the reason for prioritizing these areas. You get a little bit more complicated just with the amount of frontage that yards have and barriers and soil. So again, just foreshadowing some of the complications. So this is kind of how we propose to start the project. However, we are asking today to approve a contract for 4 miles of HESCO barriers. And the idea would be that eventually, as quickly as possible, we would install barriers along the length of the river. And of course, with more time, with more study, we're going to be able to tell you how tall those barriers have to be. But at this moment, the full scope of the project is the entire populated length of the river. We're very fortunate that we have unpopulated land on one side. So that's a blessing that a lot of places who are struggling with these issues are not able to do. So what will the HESCO barriers look like? You saw a few images of them. This is just a mock-up that CBJ Engineering did with kind of the ideal installation scenario, right? We have 5 feet from the beginning of the riverbank slope. We've got plenty of ground to install the barriers. We're able to stack them if needed. The ground is hard. It's not soft sand. There's plenty of yard in front for that. A little bit more difficult situation we have modeled here, which is, of course, not nearly as much frontage, right? So maybe we may have to remove porches, greenhouses. There may be instances where it's a lot tighter to be able to install those barriers. So those are all challenges that we don't have good answers to. And I know our constituents are like, will you remove my porch? Will you remove will you move my greenhouse? And what will you do in this circumstance? And if the assembly moves forward with approving the contract today, we will immediately send staff out in the field to both do site surveys of those properties, talk to property owners, and work on agreements to enter into their property. So that will be the very next step that we do, again, so we can bring you back that information and answer the questions that constituents have. So again, just want to talk about some of the challenges here. I'm sorry, I've got like a piece of hair. There we go. Okay.
Katie, I'm going to interrupt for just a moment. This is Beth. Because you can't see the other folks, do you want me to let you know when assembly members are raising their hands with questions, or do you want to wait until the end?
I think I would like to wait until the end, but I will let Mayor Weldon make that call.
Okay, Mayor Weldon, I don't know if you can see folks when we're seeing them, but let me know. And also, just so you do know, Erin Jacobs has joined our panelist and is available.
I can't see anybody unless they've raised their hand. Right now, I don't see any hands raised. Is that correct?
Yes, Michelle lowered her hand. At
Okay,
the time I interrupted, she was the only one who had a hand raised.
Okay, when Katie Adam Manager is sharing her screen, I can't see anybody. We'll just wait till the end for now.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
So again, some of the challenges and unanswered questions with these barriers, they're ugly, they're large. Again, they're designed for a 5-year lifespan. And while we will be expeditiously looking on long-term solutions, we really don't know what that looks like until that study has been done. They will likely need to be filled with a loader so that we could be, tearing up yards just in the process of filling these barriers. Again, this is on private property, right? So we'll be requesting access to homeowners' private property, and I'm sure we will need to struggle with decisions of if the homeowner is unwilling to grant that access. I touched on it a little bit before, but if there's not enough property to install barriers, what does that look like? Or if the soils are too heavy. And I think the big takeaway here is that the unknown variable, and the reason why I can't say it's going to cost X to do this project, is because we don't know what the site preparation will look like. And we don't know that for 2 reasons. We don't know what will be needed to make sure that the property can, withstand and house the barrier. And we will know that. We will know that as soon as we can get out in the field and get some of those questions. And we also don't know, there's policy questions for the assembly to decide, like, what is the assembly willing to pay for? What is the homeowner willing to pay for in those rare circumstances where there's just no room to install those barriers. So what my plan is to bring back to you as much information as possible from the field work at the October 21st meeting, when you will be making that appropriation decision, so that you can have, again, just more information. As time goes on, we have more information. Unfortunately, time is not something we've got a tremendous amount of in this circumstance. So in the memo, and this presentation really just outlines the memo, I present 4 options to you. There is always the do nothing option, and every project should be considered against the do nothing option. There's the option of just providing sandbags and sand and developing a distribution plan for sandbags for individual property owners. This is very common across the United States. It's a common approach. There's an option to just install HESCO barriers where the river jumped the banks during the August 2024 event, based on the theory that if we can keep it from jumping the bank in those 2 areas, then we may not have to install barriers through the length of the river. And then there's the option to install HESCO barriers along the length of the river, which is what staff is recommending to you today. And we are recommending that we do that in phases. The first phase being the areas, Killowitch, Marion, Meander, and then the second phase developing into the entire length of the river. And I just, want you to know that the reason why we're recommending it in phases is to give you the comfort of more information when you have to make those more impactful policy decisions. So this is a timeline that is included in your memo. The only thing that wasn't included is the public meeting with Army Corps of Engineers. They got approval to participate before or after the memo was published. But again, really bringing them in and want to thank them for just being so very helpful. But planning a public meeting as soon as possible, bringing you back the emergency legislation on October 21st. Again, that's where we will bring you more information about how our conversations went in the field, what property owners are saying. But we do plan on beginning outreach to individual property owners just as soon as this meeting is over, so that we can start to do that work. Then really we're installing barriers kind of as quickly as we can in the fall, and we would do that with CBJ employees in order to be able to move quickly. And then once it looks like a pretty good chance that Suicide Basin will not release this fall, which is kind of what I'm anticipating, we will be able to focus on site preparation and really focus on that bigger flood fighting plan. We will be able to have more information. We need 3 days of good weather to fly LiDAR. Unfortunately, the LiDAR was flown like days before the August 2023 event. So, these are pieces of information that we will have before we ask for an appropriation for phase 2 of the project. And again, phase 2 is armoring, some extent of the developed area of the river. And this all being a goal of having the valley protected before next Yoka Loop season. So I have this timeline listed as ambitious because there's going to be like 17 questions and challenges, and I'm going to be coming back to you with all of these policy decisions. So I think this is the type of project that will keep on giving, and I will keep bringing you updates and more importantly, times where you have to make decisions. I just want to talk a little bit about funding, and I do apologize that funding, that I can't give you a solid cost estimate. You have a flyer or a one-pager in your packet that we submitted to the all the meetings that we went to in DC that says 4.7 million. Well, that's a WAG based on not a lot of information on site preparation. So again, site preparation is our biggest unknown. We are working on grants. There's a tremendous amount of funding possibilities out there, but the challenge with grants is just getting the funding in time. I mean, really, a grant is about a 2-year turnaround from when you submit the grant to when you have available funding. That being said, Tlingit and Haida is aggressively working on preparing potential grants for agencies that may have some leftover federal funding. So I have a meeting later today with them, and they've just been great leaning in and identifying some of those funds. But I think it would be, I don't want to have false hope that we're going to be able to get grants to pay for all of this. I think, you know, the longer we take, the more likely, and we will be continuing to pursue every opportunity possible. I do want to mention that there's still work on a continuing resolution for disaster recovery in DC that we will be, you know, Sullivan and Murkowski and Peltola have all been supportive of, including Juneau in some fashion in that legislation. But we've been advised that even if, you know, some like emergency resolution or emergency legislation passes on the federal level, it takes a long time for that money to trickle down to communities. And that's just the nature of dealing with the federal government. This, I want to end with this quote because I want to acknowledge how difficult this situation has been for all of you and the entire community listening. I have found myself going on many roller coasters of like optimism and pessimism, and I want to acknowledge that I'm asking you in the course of a lunch hour to make decisions that involve all of those questions and hesitations. And so I watched a documentary this weekend and this resonated with me. You have to confront the brutal facts that you might not pull it off, yet at the same time have unwavering faith, completely unwavering faith. And you have to do both at the same time. So I'm asking you to do that as you look at the decisions before you today to direct staff to request sandbags, to approve an ordinance approving the contract with Army Corps of Engineers, and to request introduction of emergency legislation at the next meeting. So that is the conclusion of my kind of presentation to walk you through the memo. I'm happy, Madam Mayor, to take questions, and then we can talk to National Weather Service.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Who has questions on the assessment? Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I have a number of questions, but I see I'm not the
Get
only
one.
one. Okay. All right. I'll start with just being absolutely clear on what you're asking for us today. So staff is currently recommending both options 2, which is the sandbags, and option 4, which is kind of the full length for the HESCO barriers. Is that correct?
Madam Manager.
Thank you. Yeah, that is correct. Although I do want to make sure you know that there will be multiple opportunities and requirements for you to kind of reaffirm that decision when you have more information along the path. So this is starting down that path. And I appreciate that there are sunk costs and efforts and hope involved with starting down that path, but there will be more opportunities to check in on that path as we move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ball.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll start by just thanking staff for working incredibly hard to try to bring options forward to us and to the community, and doing so knowing that, you know, there are so many unknowns, and you know, that some of these might not work, but it's worth our community talking about them, thinking about them, trying to figure out what can be done. My question is about the cost estimate. You know, you talked about how hard it is and that we will get more information. But you did throw out a number there. I'm curious, you know, did you think through, you know, I'm just imagining if there is a house that doesn't have a lawn, that, you know, no one is going to voluntarily give us their house, and so we'd have to, you know, potentially be buying property. Did your estimate kind of include some you know, big expenses like that may be involved here as we think about how many different properties we would need to be installing these on?
Madam Manager.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a really good one to provide more granularity. Yes, The cost estimate includes anticipating unknowns, probably not many buyouts or things of that nature, just because of how expensive that would be. But to give you a sense of perspective, the cost of installing the barriers themselves is relatively minimal. It's $150,000 to $200,000 per mile. So if we're looking at 4 miles of riverbank, we're not even looking at $1 million to just, nice, easy, straightforward installation. It's all the kind of unknowns that drive that cost. So you can see that if we're thinking about a $5 million project, we have built in those unknowns when we talk about it in those terms. Does that help?
All right, Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Kind of similar, kind of not. I fully understand the same way all of this is. You have so many variables and there's so many unknowns, as you referenced. I know we also were creating or collecting what information we could throughout all the follow-up response to the last flood. So do we have any sense, I guess, similar to, thinking, did you include buyouts? Do we have any sense of how many properties you reference build out of the bank? And I'm just thinking of how that would affect costs. Like, do we have any sense of how many don't have that 5 feet of bank?
Madam Manager.
We do not at this moment because we haven't done that
Field work.
work, and we don't have the updated LiDAR data since the 2023 event. We do know that in phase 1, there are 76 properties, and I can get the phase 2 number for you. It's just that doesn't happen to be on the top of my head.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is about, let's say that we go this direction and we fund it and we're beginning to start to install these HESCO barriers. What mechanisms will the city have if we have either a property that just simply doesn't have the room and they're saying, nope, I'm not paying anything, or if there's a deck or there's plenty of fences that go along the river, what mechanism will CBJ be able to use to circumvent going around or having to have people remove decks or remove fences? And then how will we determine, how are we going to put them back whole? I was trying to think logistically how you would do this, but if we're having to disassemble fences, put up these this barrier, then what's the end strategy? How do we pull this out? I know it's just so early, but those are some of the things that I think are going to get in the way. I think my main question is what's CBJ's authority or mechanism if 1 or 2 properties are not complying with what we're trying to accomplish here? That's my question. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Madam Manager.
The city attorney has a nice analysis in the memo of kind of what our legal box is. And we do have the ability to protect life and property to enter people's property. I think that, the likelihood of that being challenged is very much there. And then the courts would decide, how thoughtful and how well did we, justified were we in taking that action. Certainly the hope is to work with complying landowners, which is why we would do that initial legwork. So under the disaster declaration, we can do that work. And that's, part of the kind of risk assessment. And I would defer to Attorney Wright any kind of more detail on that. But you also asked the question of how would the city, manage those site preparation that, costs money, removing a deck, and also how would we kind of make properties whole. And I think that is a policy question that the Assembly will have to make. And I think that you will make that when you have more information about how many properties that looks like and what that cost would be, because that will drive the cost of the project. And, it's possible that, you're willing to do X, Y, Z, but not ABC from a kind of pay for both being able to install the barriers and remove the barriers. I mean, let's not forget that these barriers will protect people's homes, they will protect people's homes behind them, but they will also protect the individuals who are being asked to remove their fence or create space in their yard. So there's definitely an incentive. And again, where that reasonable line lies will be another policy decision that we will be bringing back to you when we have more information.
Thank you, Madam Manager.
Well, looks like we're gonna go through round 2 unless Ms. Hale, do you have a question? You get to jump to the front of the line if you got a question.
No, my question was answered, so thank you.
All right, so we'll go through round 2. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. And it's actually kind of conveniently a follow-up to Mr. Bryson's question. It's my understanding from the memo that, and a little bit of research that I've done on these barriers, that they will require a little bit of maintenance periodically. And so I was kind of wondering how the emergency authority would factor into that. So I imagine, so we're getting this authority from the governor's disaster declaration. I assume that probably expires at some point, but we still have authority to go onto people's properties and maintain these barriers afterwards.
Thank you, Madam Manager.
But I don't think that the declaration necessarily has an expiration. We did budget for, I mean, we threw $400,000 in the presentation that you just saw as a budget for maintenance, probably less maintenance early on, more later on. And of course, all of that depends if we're successfully fighting harrowing floods, then they might get a little bit more beat down. I would defer from that, like how long will we have the right to access people's private property to maintain these barriers to Attorney Wright if she's available.
Thank you. So as Manager Kessler said, there is no expiration for that emergency declaration. The lifetime that we're looking at is 5 to 10 years on those barriers, paired with any other flood fighting mitigation. And so I believe that we are solid on that time frame. We also are working to put together something for the homeowners where we work with them, we communicate with them, they know what we're doing. And so the hope would be that would be ongoing, continuous access to allow us to take these measures that will save their homes, hopefully.
Thank you both.
Oops, sorry, I muted myself. Ms. Hughes Candies.
God, and then I muted myself. We're out of practice. We're out of practice. Madam Manager, staying on the theme of maintenance, our tax dollars at work, the Army Corps, if we do this today, will send us all the barriers we need, knowing that maintenance is part of it and knowing that we anticipate leaving them up that long. Is that a continuous? I don't know where the cost comes from in that maintenance. Is that us purchasing them or is that something else? Would they provide a ready supply if we needed to replace them?
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that question. It would probably depend on if we have an event that, I mean, if we have another event and they're damaged because we've had a flood event, then we would probably be eligible for some type of emergency measures. I do know that we own the, like, we own the kind of barriers and caring for them and any, liability associated with them. So once they're ours, it's, they're ours. I do have Dan Allard and Michael, and I have Michael's last name here, from Army Corps, who are available for questions should the assembly have them. And just a huge thank you to both those gentlemen and Anchorage District for their help.
Thank you. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and maybe this is a question for those other folks. I'm not sure, but I'll start with you, Madam Manager, and you can direct as needed. But I'm curious about the kind of we're going to have to put this in phases, if we move forward, and we know that, I'm assuming there will be challenging spots that take some work, whether that's because the landowner doesn't want us there or they're just, hard soils, whatever. I'm kind of working on an assumption that this wall of barriers only works if it's all in place, and that if you have gaps or you have kind of weak points, that could actually do tremendous damage. Like, is that in a, just thinking about like flood kind of going in one particular area and filling in the back? Is that a safe assumption that, it's kind of paramount that we get this whole thing in place, kind of as quickly as possible, using all the tools at our service to make it work?
Well, thank you, Madam Manager.
Yeah, so I'm not a hydrologist, and I bet there are hydrologists on this call listening to me, but I will explain it how I understand it. I do think there are some areas where installing barriers because of the flow of the river would be beneficial, or have the potential to be beneficial regardless. Risky, yes, because we don't know. I do think that in general, and that's why our proposal is kind of in for a penny, in for a pound, you have to install barriers on the entire riverfront. That being said, because of the flow of the river, there are areas where if the river jumps the bank, it doesn't inundate the entire valley. And there are areas where because of the flow of the river, it might. So that is all information that once we have a hydrological study, we'll be able to be more thoughtful about how we implement phase 2 and why we're starting with the areas that we're starting with in phase 1.
Ms. Euphanies.
Kind of a follow-up to that. No, I'm not a hydrologist either, but I know, certain mitigations can make the river go faster. I don't have the diagram up in front of me on the screen, when we're talking about the populated river, and the length of the river, we have, several municipal properties downstream, and then it's sort of some areas that are lesser populated, but that are owned by private owners. I'm thinking of the lumber yard and things like that, the bridge, other pieces of infrastructure we'd want to protect. Are we caring for that? Are we going that far down without having that diagram in front of me? Do you want to just comment on that, I guess?
I think that phase 2 would include as much as is practical, and it's hard to, the diagram that I showed you is like a red line that just has anywhere where it's property that's developed, we're installing a barrier, a HESCO barrier. Now I can tell you that we will, with more time and with more analysis, we'll be able to be more thoughtful about that and be able to bring you, well, we could protect X, Y, and Z at this cost and bring you those assessments. Certainly the intention right now is to do the whole thing, as in protect all of our developed property. And what I can't guarantee you is how feasible that is once we've started down that road.
Thanks.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'm really saying this, I think, more for the audience that's listening, because I think I know the answer to this. But when you talk about protecting Killowitz, you're also talking about protecting that corner opposite Melvin Park where the river jumped the bank and that caused so much flooding on Emily and G and those streets. Is that correct, Madam Manager?
Madam Manager.
Yes, that is correct. We are talking about protecting where the river jumped the bank there and have been referring to it as Killowitch.
All right, well, I see a break in questions. Madam Manager, I'm being very careful of the time. Who else did you want to talk today? Keeping in mind we have about 15 minutes. And we have the testimony.
Thank you. I do think that it would be useful to have Aaron Jacobs give us an update on Suicide Basin, just because a lot of these decisions and comfort level in our community is, are we facing this threat, tomorrow or in the spring or in the summer? And so if we can pull him over, if he's available, that would be great.
Do you have him over?
Mr. Jacobs, you are actually in panelist mode already, and go ahead and unmute yourself.
And Mr. Jacobs, please give us an update, but be advised we are pressed for time, so keep as brief as you can.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. So currently the Suicide Basin is about half full in elevation, or at least volume of water that we can tell from previous information. And we are seeing about a foot rise per day as our freezing levels have been dropping. And so to put that into context, to see a full basin that we know of right now, that would be 145 feet that we would have to fill. So essentially we're seeing like a foot rise per day with our freezing levels as they are right now. It would take 145 days to see a full basin. The latest we've seen an outburst flood from the Mendenhall has been late October, and that was in 2022. And in that, what we're able to estimate, there was probably about 12 feet, so 1,312 feet of elevation in the basin, and that caused moderate flooding. And so if all the water released from the basin at this time with the current levels, that would still hit a moderate flood stage of about like 10.5 feet. Also, the Mendenhall River is also fairly low right now, and we should continue to see the base flow of the Mendenhall River slowly drop as those freezing levels continue to stay low. Give some more context, we haven't seen the latest outburst that we've seen was in late October. We've never seen one over the winter time. Not saying that it couldn't take place, but just in the past, we have not seen one take place in November, December, or January. For reference on how much water we've seen in the basin leading into the season, if it doesn't release into the fall time, what that will tell us is that we could just see a fuller basin a lot earlier next year. The earliest release we've seen on history right now has been like early June, late May, and that happened early in the time frame, like 2014, 2015, with some of those earlier outburst events. But I'll just leave right there for now, and I will take any questions of assembly members. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Jacobs? Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. Just a clarification. So that 10.5 foot flood stage that would be possible with the current levels that the basin is filled with. Could you describe what that would look like for homeowners or for the surrounding area?
Yeah, so primarily at that 10.5 feet, that's our moderate flooding, and most of the area that would be inundated or at least get impacted from those flood levels will be north of the Mendenhall Back Loop Bridge. So View Drive and the Forest Service campground will get impacted. We have seen some changes within the river system from last year's event, and we haven't updated any of our impact statements or flood stages, but we did see after this event or during the 2024 event that View Drive did not see as impactful flooding at those lower levels due to the changes within the river. So we're hoping that there wouldn't be any impacts along View Drive at those levels currently if all the water would release at this time, but those are still based on previous information from other events.
Thank you.
No more. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much, Mr. Jacobs, for being here and for everything you've done. Does the basin freeze in, say, January?
Not that I know of. I don't think it will freeze totally solid, but we don't really have that information to say. But when the cameras are installed or at least the batteries are put back in and running in the springtime, but there is water in the basin, usually at lower levels, but there is water in the basin. Pretty much is is filling into the basin pretty much all season, but just at a lower rate due to the melt. And you would think in the middle of January, whether you really have very minimal, but still maybe some runoff into the basin, but it would be fairly low.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing no questions at this time. Madam Manager, so we can move on, correct? Madam Manager, I'm looking at you. You are correct.
Correct.
Okay,
I gave a thumbs up, but verbal confirmation.
there we go. So, okay, with that, they asked us, the staff asked us for several different things, so, okay, I'll look for Madam Deputy Manager for a motion at this time, and we'll try and walk through this, because the motion, the staff recommendations and our ordinance don't quite match perfectly, because we have to do more than that. So we'll start with that. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move initially that we order the individual sandbags and provide sand and the sandbags to Juneau residents, and I ask for unanimous consent.
I think, okay. I was looking at staff recommendations, but that's not one of them. So anyway, so she's looking at number 2. Any objection to number 2?
Sorry for messing up the order, Madam Mayor. I'm kind of working.
Well, yeah, that's all right. So she's looking at option number 2, which is provide sandbags and sand to residents. These are not the HESCO barriers.
These are not the HESCO barriers. And I was actually looking at the recommendations, I'm sorry, in the actual memo, which says direct staff to request sandbags from USACE and develop a plan for distribution. So I'm sorry, that's my first motion. And my second motion will be approving the emergency ordinance.
Okay, so it's a little confusing, so I'm objecting to the question. Madam Manager, when your staff recommendation to direct staff to request sandbags from USAC and develop a plan for distribution, is that for homeowners or is that for the HESCO barriers?
That is for homeowners. So those are small sandbags.
Okay.
And I'm I believe Deputy Mayor is looking at page 6 on the memo where I say requested motions, and you're right, it's a little awkward because the ordinance is in between just 2 motions that are giving staff direction.
Right, and then your PowerPoint unfortunately gave even another option or another staff recommendation. So
That's right.
We'll wait it through. So okay, I will remove my objection with the clarification. Any other objection? Okay, seeing none, that motion passes. All right. So item 2 is the ordinance itself. Madam Clerk.
Madam Mayor, this is ordinance, oops, I just lost it. Ordinance 2024-34, an emergency ordinance authorizing the manager to execute a cooperative agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers for advanced measure assistance.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager, do you need to add anything to this?
No matter, I will just quickly summarize that it approves the contract and also agrees to indemnify the Army Corps of Engineers, which is an allowable exception in code.
Okay, thank you. We have 2 people that have signed up for public testimony on this. First one is Clinton Singletary. Would you please bring over Mr. Singletary?
Mr. Singletary, you should be allowed to talk if you'd like to unmute yourself at this time.
Yes,
Mr. Singletary, please state your name and area town you live in for the record, and because we're pressed for time, please limit to 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My name is Clinton Singletary, live at 9352 Center Court. First off, just want to say I'm in support of the ordinance you have in front of you. It is nice to see the city taking some concrete action towards fighting future flood events. The HESCO barriers being discussed are a reasonable first step for the city to take while a long-term solution is being developed. Obviously, they don't come without their challenges, as have been talked about today, but pushing through these challenges is imperative to provide at least some level of protection for residents and infrastructure. The city and assembly should do everything they can to educate themselves on the science behind these events and realize what is at stake if a long-term solution is not reached. These events will continue happening as the glacier retreats, and from the research I've seen, they'll likely only get worse each year until effective mitigation is in place. In addition, the city should significantly step up its efforts to educate the community as a whole as to what is at stake. I've heard several times over the last couple months that this is only impacting a few rich people on the river. I can assure you that is not the case, and the community as a whole seems to not understand that next year's event could flood, close to 500 homes and businesses, including significant damage to various CBJ infrastructure. Lastly, I'd urge the Assembly to take a hard look at the finances of mitigation and repairs, even aside from pursuing grants. This year, for example, almost $1.4 million was spent to repair and add protection to existing infrastructure. This cost could be significantly more in future years, along with the additional cost of taking steps to protect CBJ property. The city and the assembly should re-examine its budget priorities over its next few budget cycles to ensure that significant funding is set aside to help combat these events. You may have to make some unpopular choices to protect the valley and the city as a whole, and effectively educating the community now about these upcoming choices will be vital. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Any clarifying questions for Mr. Secretary? Dina, thank you for your testimony tonight. Next, we have Sandra Edwards. Please bring her over. Madam Clerk, you're muted.
We are rusty at this, aren't we? I have unmuted someone named Sandy. I think this is Miss Edwardson. If so, you can unmute yourself at this time and give your testimony.
Ms. Edwardson, if that is you, please state your name and the area of town you live in for the record, and for the sake of time, please limit your testimony to 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Sandra Edwardson. I live at Killowitch Drive. I'm calling in to express my support for option 4 regarding the immediate mitigation of potential glacier outbursts in our community. As we're aware, the recent reports from the city manager indicated that we could face a glacier outburst in a few weeks, although we just heard maybe otherwise. This imminent threat underscores the urgent need for decisive action to protect our residents, particularly the approximately 290 plus families living in the Mendenhall Valley who are at risk of significant property damage. In a perfect world, we would have a luxury of time to develop comprehensive and long-term strategies for flood mitigation. However, given the circumstances, we must prioritize immediate measures that can provide effective protection. The proposal of the Army Corps of Engineers to put in place sandbags along the riverbank offers a timely and practical solution. This approach allows us to mobilize quickly and establish a temporary barrier to redirect water flow, reducing the risk of flooding in vulnerable areas. While sandbags are not
the one that has mine or clerks on it.
Madam Clerk, now you're not muted.
Oh, sorry. So
Go ahead, Ms. Edwardson.
Apologies, sorry.
No worries. While sandbags are not a permanent fix, this option demonstrates our commitment to safety and well-being of our community. It is essential that we act now to minimize potential damage and provide reassurance to our residents. I urge the Assembly to consider passing consider the pressing nature of the situation to support option 4 as discussed in recent meetings. Thank you very much for listening to me, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Edwardson. Any clarifying questions from Ms. Edwardson? I'm going to remind everybody to be on mute. Ms. Hale, you need to be on mute. Thank you.
Sorry
Yes,
about that.
we're out of practice. So I don't see any questions. So thank you, Ms. Edwardson. I also have a Mr. Hatch signed up, but it looks like he's talking about something else in this actual ordinance. If that's not the case, Mr. Hatch, please raise your hand and we'll bring you over.
Okay, Madam Mayor, he does have his hand raised. Mr. Hatch, you should be able to speak at this time.
All right, please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 2 minutes. Mr. Hatch, are you there? We cannot hear you if you're talking.
And you're unmuted on our end, so I think if you are muted, it's on your end.
Mr. Hatch, we cannot hear you at this time, so we will have to come back to you at another time if we can get you. All right, with that, we have an ordinance. Is there any objection?
Madam Mayor, may I move the ordinance?
Oh, yes, thank you.
I was going to ask for a motion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Sorry.
Madam Deputy Mayor.
Trying too busy to do Zoom. Apologize. Ms. Hale.
I move ordinance 2024-34, an emergency ordinance authorizing the manager to execute a cooperative agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers for advanced measure assistance. And this would be the ordering of the HESCO barriers and the assistance from the Army Corps, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Ms. Wall, would you care to speak to your objection?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a question for the maker of the motion. Are we going to also after this discussion introduce the other thing? I'm just kind of wondering about the order of operations here.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Mayor.
It's okay if you are, just want to make sure I understand what's happening next.
So what's happening right now, and Ms. Hale can correct me if I'm wrong because she made the motion. We're just passing ordinance 2024-34, and then we will have to come back to the assembly to look at introducing emergency legislation at the October 21st meeting for up to $2 million to install the first phase.
So we don't need to introduce that today.
I'm looking at Ms. Kester for that. Ms. Kester, from reading your recommendations, we need to introduce the appropriating ordinance at the October 21st as an emergency legislation.
You are correct that an emergency resolution only needs one reading. However, by making this motion, you will establish your intent and allow us to publicly notice that and make sure we get a lot of participation on the 21st.
I'm sorry, I'm still confused. Do we need another motion after this one to do that?
Madam Managers, I'm confused also. Thank you, Ms. Wall. So the ordinance right now executes a cooperative agreement. Does it also
Uh-oh, we lost the mayor.
Madam Mayor, I thought that it was my understanding that I would next introduce a motion to draft the emergency ordinance to fund that $2 million that then will be heard at that October 21st meeting.
And as Ms. Kester just noted, we did lose the mayor from the attendance in the Zoom world. So Madam Hale, you are acting mayor at this time until Ms. Belden resumes her attendance.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And since Okay, Ms. Wall, I think I can ask Ms. Huskandes for your questions now.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hale. I was just gonna offer the same motion to you so we could keep the meeting going. So if it's okay with you, I'll make the same motion that you did since you're now conducting the meeting and we can move forward on that. We need the mayor to make sense.
Madam Clerk, sorry, my computer went dead for some reason. So now I'm on my phone. So hopefully you guys can hear me.
We can, and we briefly realized we lost you and Ms. Hale had taken over, but now that you're back.
Okay, so
let
I'll
you guys-
catch up in a minute. Ms. Wall, did you remove your objection?
No, I'll keep my objection just so I can make a statement. Given.
Okay, and then Ms. Huskandes, you had raised your hand as an objection.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. It was an objection for a statement. And I'll let Ms. Wall talk and then we'll see if I need to say anything.
Okay, so for now, Ms. Wall, I'll come back to you. You've objected. Would you wish to speak to your objection?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I wasn't sure whether to say this now or the next action we take, but I'll say it now that, you know, I'm interested in continuing to move this process forward and order these barriers. I have lots of concerns about the feasibility of this project. I want to look at all options to protect these houses from flooding. I think this is, you know, significant as we've heard from the community impact in our community. I think, you know, there's a variety of concerns that I want some public feedback on, really is where I'm at today. And so I'm excited some homework's going to be done between now and the 21st. I want to know how comfortable people are putting these things in their yards. You know, we're going to have to really have the support of the community and those homeowners to make this work, because piecemealing it here and there is not going to do the job. And so I'm glad staff are going to go out and talk to people and look at the soils and bring us more information that'll help me make a decision on the 21st. And I also want to hear from the public on that, especially the homeowners living on the river. It's also, you know, we have the money right now in our emergency fund, or our restricted budget reserve. That's what that's for, these types of emergencies, but it will take work to refill those coffers if we spend the kind of money that we think this is going to take. And so I also want to hear from the public about their willingness to realize that in the future we would be looking, you know, at either increasing taxes or significant you know, reductions to other services. And I think I've heard from a lot of people, they're comfortable with that. This is a big deal, but I'd love more feedback from folks on that and just setting expectations that this is it will be a big financial lift for our community to figure out how to pay for it, but excited to move, or I mean, hesitant, nervous, stressed out about moving forward. That's where I'm at today, but I really appreciate staff kind of continuing to bring us more information so we can see what really makes sense to make things better.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Are you going to remove your objection now?
I'll remove my objection.
Okay, Ms. Huskandes, you wish to speak to your objection.
No, Madam Mayor, me lowering my hand is me removing my objection.
All right, so at this time we have an ordinance on the table and I can't see all of you because I'm on my phone. Are there any objection? Seeing none, that ordinance passes.
Madam Mayor, Mr. Kelly had his hand raised. And just to note, because this is an emergency ordinance, it does require 6 members in agreement to pass an emergency ordinance.
Yep, we're aware of that. Mr. Kelly, do you have an objection?
No, I was actually going to make a parliamentary inquiry, and Madam Clerk just answered it for me. So thank you.
Okay, so any objection to passing ordinance 2024-34? Seeing none, that ordinance passes. Madam Manager, I'm going to you to make sure we cared for everything. Right now, I believe, okay, so I'm still a little confused. Do we still need to introduce an emergency legislation at the October 21st meeting? Or direct that to be done, or are you doing that anyway?
I would appreciate getting direction from the body to draft that legislation for your consideration on October 21st.
All right, thank you. Ms. Hale, I'll come to you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that we direct staff to draft an emergency ordinance to fund up to $2 million for flood fighting, and I don't have the language right in front of me, but that's the gist. And I ask for unanimous consent.
All right, any objection?
Objection for a question, clarifying question to the maker of the motion.
Okay, just please raise your hand. That makes it a lot easier, but go
Okay.
ahead.
I did. I'll raise my physical hand too.
All right.
So yeah, just you said ordinance. I just wanted to clarify emergency legislation. Did you mean like an emergency resolution?
No, it's an emergency legislation, so it would be appropriating legislation unless, Madam City Manager, you have something different there.
I believe it's actually a resolution, which is why I use the very vague word legislation, and we will make sure we come back with the appropriate implementing vehicle.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, may I modify my motion to say legislation rather than ordinance?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hale. All right, with that, I see Ms. Hughes Scandies, your hand is still raised. Do you have an objection?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I will just make a brief statement. I appreciate, we have a lot of people watching in the audience today. I appreciate Mr. Singletary's clear-eyedness, you know, in his comments, because he's correct that I think Juneau is a community that cares about helping out our neighbors and protecting one another's homes. So I am also very nervous about this because there are so many unknowns. So I have a big knot in my stomach, but also it seems necessary to do this. But I just want to say, because we are only 6, and because I feel like I need to say out loud, this is going to have an impact on, you know, an ongoing impact into the city's actions in the future. And I'm okay with that because, like I said, I think Juneau does care about that, but I think there's a need for speed now, but then I hope we will thoughtfully and in a nuanced way figure out exactly what that looks like on the financial end, because it will require raising taxes or potentially, or significant cuts potentially. So I just want us to acknowledge that this is important, and we are in a lucky position to have these funds in an emergency fund. So I feel good doing this right now, but let's make sure that we are committing to doing the work that will require, when it's not quick, make a decision.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Scandies.
Madam Mayor, may
Go
I make
ahead.
one statement before we vote?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I also appreciated what Mr. Singletary said, and I would actually make a correction, not a correction, an addition. We've talked a lot about the 290 plus homes that have been affected. Being half a block from the flood, I am really, really aware that this could be thousands of, and I so appreciate the thoughtfulness of the members of the assembly and their caution, and I just think this is so important for the entire community. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's see if I can.
This is like March 2020. I just have to say thanks for the flashback.
Madam Clerk, I believe we've lost the mayor. Do you want me to take over?
We have, and I was just looking to see if she was popping back up, if we want to just give it another moment to see if she comes back in here.
I'm moving her over now.
Thank you. And while we are waiting for Mayor Weldon, just so I'm clear and understanding, we had objection from Mr. Kelly and objection from Ms. Hughes Scandies. Did both of you remove your objections after your statements and questions?
That was my intention, yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, hopefully I'm good now.
We have you back, Madam Mayor, and I just clarified we did get removal of objections from Mr. Kelly and Ms. Hughes Scandies.
All right, appreciate that. So I'm just going to say something very quick too. I appreciate everybody's concern with this topic. It's a very big concern to all of us. Our staff has been working nonstop. Many of us have not gotten sleep since the event happened, just because it is so tragic and a big event, devastating to our community. And we know that this is a short-term solution, but it may end up being a long-term solution too. So people should be aware of that. With that being said, I will remove my objection, but I also agree with Ms. Wall and Ms. Hughes Scandies. We're really going to have to look at where this money is coming from and how we care for this. With that, I will remove my objection. So I believe that motion passes. Madam Manager, do we need to address anything else for you today, or do you have everything?
Thank you. I just want to mention one more thing in the context of emergency management. We have been able to soft launch a new system for homeowners to be able to sign up for both emergency alerts and just being in the know. So we will be distributing information on how our listening audience and our community can sign up for that, but that will be a serious upgrade in our ability to keep people informed and notify them in the event of an emergency. So that's just been a long time in the making, and I want to make sure that you know that we are working on that and are able to launch that today.
All right, and I know that you and I have at least talked at the assembly, hasn't come up, short-term solutions for sirens and that kind of thing, but we're still caring for that. Just to let the public know that we hear you, we're just trying to figure it all out. With that, we will move on to public participation on non-agenda item. Madam Clerk, I don't know if Mr. Hatch is still with us and if he wants to still try and talk.
Mr. Hatch, you have been unmuted, and if you are able to, you're allowed to speak at this time.
So Mr. Hatch, you have 2 minutes. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record. Mr. Hatch, we cannot hear you. So I'm not sure if you're on your phone, *6, I believe, is the proper thing to do to unmute you.
Yeah, I believe he's zooming in, Madam Mayor, and we were able to see his virtual hand, but it was not actually having any audio coming through, I'm sorry to say.
All right, I'm sorry, Mr. Hatch. We just can't seem to get you, so you'll have to send us an email what your thoughts were. With that, is there anything else that we need to deal with today, Madam Manager or Madam Clerk?
No, I just would reiterate that any of the public who has comments or suggestions to continue to send those to floodresponse@juneau.gov and to the assembly at boroughAssembly@juneau.gov. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and Madam Manager. If people can't see you, you were shaking your head no. So with that, thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.